On October 2nd, 1187, the most feared commander in the Islamic world stood before the gates of Jerusalem, and every soul inside those walls expected to die. 88 years earlier, when the first Crusaders captured this same city, chroniclers on both sides described a slaughter so complete that the streets themselves seemed to bleed. Review, Massacre reference, cinematic, no detail, check ad friendliness. Now Saladin had returned with the only army left standing. The defenders were beaten, and the wall was already broken. Everyone knew how this ended, except it didn't. The massacre everyone expected never came. And the reason why comes down to one exhausted knight, one desperate threat, and the price of 10 gold coins. How does the most fought-over city on earth change hands without burning? The answer says more about power and about mercy than any battle of the Middle Ages. Stay with me, because the deal struck at these gates still gets argued about 800 years later. To understand October 1187, you have to start in July 1099. That summer, after a 5-week siege, the knights of the First Crusade broke into Jerusalem, and what followed became one of the most infamous days of the medieval world. Contemporary writers, including the Crusaders' own chroniclers, boasted of wading through blood. Modern historians put the real death toll in the thousands, perhaps 3,000, perhaps 10, but the number mattered less than the story. Review. Historical death toll. Statistics only, no imagery. Check ad friendliness. Across the Islamic world, Jerusalem became an open wound, and wounds like that are remembered for generations. For 88 years, a Crusader kingdom ruled the holy city. Kings were crowned steps from the Holy Sepulchre. Pilgrims poured in from Europe, and the kingdom's most sacred treasure, a golden reliquary said to hold wood from the true cross itself, was carried before its armies, like a guarantee that God marched with them. Then, in the 1170s, everything on the other side of the map changed. His name was Salah ad-Din Yusuf. The West would remember him as Saladin, a Kurdish officer who rose to rule Egypt, then Damascus, then Aleppo. He did something no Muslim leader had managed since the Crusaders arrived. He united the lands surrounding the Crusader kingdom into a single fist. For the first time in nearly a century, Jerusalem was surrounded by one ruler, with one army and one goal. All he needed was a mistake. In the summer of 1187, the Crusaders handed him one of the worst mistakes in military history. July 4th, 1187. A hill with 2 rocky peaks called the Horns of Hattin. The entire field army of the Kingdom of Jerusalem, roughly 20,000 men, nearly every fighting man the kingdom had, stood surrounded on waterless ground, baking in the summer heat, while smoke from grass fires lit by Saladin's troops drifted through their ranks. They had marched away from their only water source the day before. By afternoon, the army of Jerusalem had simply ceased to exist. The king was captured alive, and the true cross, the relic that had led every Crusader army for 4 generations, was taken as a trophy. To the kingdom, it felt like God himself had changed sides. What followed was collapse. Acre fell, Jaffa fell, Ascalon fell. City after city surrendered, because there was no army left to relieve them. By September, refugees were streaming into Jerusalem, a city now swollen to perhaps 60,000 people, where, one chronicler claimed, there were 50 women and children for every man who could hold a sword. And here is where the story produces its unlikely hero. Not a king, not a legend, but a mid-ranking baron who happened to be the highest-ranking soldier left alive and free. His name was Balian of Ibelin. Balian had survived Hattin and escaped to the coast. His wife, a former queen of Jerusalem, Maria Komnena, was still inside the doomed city with their children. So Balian did something remarkable. He wrote to Saladin and asked for safe conduct to walk into a city his enemy was about to besiege, just to bring his family out. Saladin agreed on one condition: 1 night only, and Balian must swear never to raise arms against him again. But when Balian rode through the gates, the city broke that promise for him. The patriarch, the queen, the crowds, they begged the last baron in Jerusalem to lead them. And when Balian wrote to Saladin, ashamed, to confess he could not keep his oath, Saladin's reply stunned everyone. He released Balian from the promise. Then he sent his own soldiers to escort Balian's wife and children safely out of the war zone. He protected the family of the man preparing to fight him. Hold on to that detail, because it tells you exactly how this siege is going to end. Inside the walls, Balian took stock, a city of tens of thousands, and by the chronicles, only a handful of knights left to defend it. So in one night, he knighted 60 of them himself, squires and the sons of merchants, boys raised to be shopkeepers, given a sword and a title because there was no one else. They melted silver from the roof of the Holy Sepulchre to mint emergency coins for soldiers' pay. Every man who could stand went to the walls. On September 20th, 1187, Saladin's army arrived, and the last siege of Crusader Jerusalem began. For days, the defenders actually held. Siege towers were burned, assaults were thrown back. Then Saladin did what professionals do. He moved his engineers to the northeast corner and put them to work under the ground. Sappers tunneled beneath the wall, propped it with timber, and burned the props. On September 29th, a whole section of wall came down, almost exactly where the Crusaders themselves had broken into the city in 1099. History was rhyming, and everyone inside could hear it. The breach could not be held. Jerusalem was militarily finished. The only question left was the one everyone had been dreading for 88 years. What happens to the people inside? Balian rode out to negotiate. Saladin's first answer was no. He had sworn an oath of his own to take Jerusalem by the sword, exactly as it had been taken from Islam. As they spoke, his banners were already being raised over the breach. And this is the moment Balian of Ibelin earned his place in history. Out of options, the last defender of Jerusalem made a threat so extreme, it changed the Sultan's mind. If no terms were given, Balian said, the defenders would destroy everything before dying. The 5,000 Muslim prisoners in the city would be killed. Review: prisoner threat, stated as historical quote, no imagery, check add friendliness. The treasures would burn, and the Dome of the Rock and the Al-Aqsa Mosque, among the holiest sites in Islam, the very places Saladin was coming to reclaim, would be torn down, stone by stone. Then, with nothing left to protect, every last man would charge out and die fighting. Saladin would win a mountain of rubble. Saladin consulted his advisors, and then the man who had sworn to take Jerusalem by the sword chose to take it by contract instead. On October 2nd, 1187, the city surrendered on terms. And the terms were a price list. 10 gold dinars bought a man his freedom. 5 bought a woman's. 2 bought a child's. 40 days were given to pay. For the poor who had nothing, Balian negotiated a bulk ransom, 30,000 dinars, paid largely from money the King of England had deposited in the city for a future crusade. Set 7,000 of the poorest free at a stroke. Then something happened that no one negotiated. Saladin's own brother, Al-Adil, looked at the crowds who still couldn't pay and asked for 1,000 captives as his reward for the campaign, then freed every one of them on the spot. The Patriarch was granted 700 to free, Balian 500. Saladin himself released the elderly and, by multiple accounts, sent widows and orphans away with money from his own treasury. Columns of refugees left the city under armed escort, guarded by the same army they had expected to die fighting. Chroniclers noted, almost in disbelief, that the conquering troops kept order in the streets. No killing, no burning. The contrast with 1099 could not have been sharper, and it was noticed on both sides of the world. But history is not a fairy tale, and this story has a hard edge. Not everyone was saved. Thousands who could not pay. Some chronicles say around 15,000 were taken into slavery. And in one of the ugliest footnotes of the Crusades, the Patriarch of Jerusalem walked out with wagon loads of church treasure, having paid exactly 10 dinars, his own ransom, while his flock was led away. Saladin's officers urged him to confiscate it. He refused. A deal, he said, was a deal. Mercy and its limits, in a single afternoon. Here's the strangest part of the whole story. The loser's civilization fell in love with the winner. News of Jerusalem's fall hit Europe like an earthquake. The Pope was said to have collapsed on hearing it, and the shock launched the Third Crusade, led by Richard the Lionheart. Yet within a century, European poets were writing about Saladin as the model of chivalry. Dante, writing the most Christian poem of the Middle Ages, placed Saladin not among the damned, but with the virtuous souls of antiquity. Think about how rare that is. A medieval enemy, praised by the people he defeated, for how he treated them in victory. And the date itself carried one final layer of meaning. October the 2nd, 1187, fell on the 27th of Rajab in the Islamic calendar, the traditional anniversary of the Prophet's night journey from that very rock in Jerusalem. For Saladin's contemporaries, the timing read like an answer. 88 years in the making, delivered without a massacre. 2 conquests of the same city, 2 very different mornings after. 8 centuries later, when we argue about how power should behave at its moment of total victory, this is still one of the first stories historians reach for. One beaten knight with nothing left but a threat. One conqueror with every reason for revenge, who chose arithmetic over annihilation. Jerusalem would change hands again, and the Crusades would grind on for another century. But October the 2nd, 1187, remains the day the medieval world proved that even holy war could end with a signature, instead of a slaughter. Mercy, it turns out, can be a weapon too, one that's still winning arguments 800 years later.